Welcome, everyone. My name is Amber Twitty, and this is the May 5th, 2022 edition of CED Office Hour Live. This is a live discussion, interaction, engagement activity that the Community and Economic Development team of Central State University Extension does on a weekly basis every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m., where it's just an open forum for us to talk about all things community and economic development. And I always like to talk about what community and economic development is, and commonly known as CED, because it's a vast thing, just like diversity. It touches on everything, right? And so CED touches on infrastructure, buildings, um, highways, how we move in those spaces on one end. The other end is the development of people, right? Self-sufficiency, workforce development, things of that nature, personal and professional development. And the connector between those two is businesses and organizations, the capacity of those businesses and organizations, right? And as CED professionals, we look at that whole entire system, right? That affects how we live, work, play, thrive, and navigate through all of that. Um, and we like to kind of plug and play where we can have impact on those systems to improve. And with us today, we have Miss Melanie Bryant, who I have had the pleasure of knowing for several years now. We have worked together on different projects. And whenever I get a chance to bring her in, I always do. So I'm glad that I was able to get Miss Melanie in in our CD Office Hour Live. She is the Minority and Small Business Advocate for the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation, also known as the BWC. And a lot of people may be a little fearful of the BWC, or they kind of adverse because businesses only think about, oh, that's an injury claim. That means I have an insurance claim. I have money. There's some kind of loss, right? But as you will learn today, that's only a portion of the overall workings of the BWC. They actually have a whole lot more um, resources for businesses, right? And part of Melanie's job is to go out and let people know about all of those resources. And so we're going to use this forum today in this next hour to um, to talk about some of those things and all the great things that really come out of the BWC. Um, that is much more than just an insurance claim. So at this point in time, Melanie, can you get us started off just talking about your background, how you even got to the BWC, and then we'll go into some of your programming.
Sorry about that. I had to silence my dog, who is anything he hears from Amazon, he has a fit. So, my name is Melanie Bryant, and I am the Minority and Small Business Advocate with the Bureau of Workers' Comp. I've been in workers' comp for almost 30 years, and I hate saying that because it definitely does date me. Because now you're all thinking, like, how old is this woman? But I've been in workers' comp for 30 years, so it's something I'm passionate about, and something that I've realized in all my 30 years that small businesses, minority businesses, you guys don't know, you don't know. And you're wearing 10 different hats. So the larger corporations have someone who is dedicated to workers' comp. And so they know the laws, they know all the compliance issues, those types of issues. But for you as a small business, you don't know. You're trying to figure out what you need to do and what that means as far as workers' compensation is concerned. So the most important thing to understand is we are one of 4 monopolistic states in the country. And monopolistic basically means you either have workers' compensation coverage with us or you do not have workers' compensation coverage. And I think it's sometimes very hard for small businesses, independent contractors to understand is that your private health insurance, Progressive, Anthem, all of the different types of insurances that we all have in our lives cannot, by law, pay for a work-related injury in the state of Ohio. As I said, it's us and 4 other states. So when you think about workers' compensation, understand that if you say these 2 words, and I always say this to people, hurt and work, it must come through our agency by law in the state of Ohio. So I get a lot of contractors, independent contractors, sole proprietors who say, I'm not going to get workers' compensation coverage because my husband has health insurance or my wife has health insurance. And they're not understanding that those claims cannot and will not be covered by law. They will reject it because they have to. No one wants to lose their license in Ohio. So they will reject those types of claims, and it must come through our agency. So that's one of the most important things that I think most people do not understand in the state of Ohio. And so what do we do? And most people ask questions like, if you haven't dealt with us, it isn't something that most people are thinking about. What we do is, you can think of it very similarly to automobile insurance. So we all have cars, and then we get insurance for those cars. And basically we're saying if something were to happen with that car, and there was an accident, the premiums that I pay then do cover any accidents, any type of damage to that automobile. The same thing with workers' compensation. So for instance, if you were to have workers' compensation insurance and you paid a couple $100s a month for premiums, any injury that would occur for your employees would be covered by law under workers' compensation. So no co-pays, no additional out-of-pocket expenses. You pay premiums to us, and anything that incurs while an employee is working for you is covered by our agency. So we pay for lost wages. We pay for medical expenses. We pay for anything that would incur within that claim, in which that could be a liability for you as an employer. So you no longer have to think about that. So that's also very important to consider. One of the most, I'd say the questions that I get the most from individuals is, how much is it? And I always tell people, I'm good, but I'm not that good. And so we have over 600 manual classifications, and manual classifications are basically descriptions of work. So it is very specific as to what an individual does. So for people like me and Amber, we're considered clerical. Our rate, I always tell people, like, I'm the cheapest employee ever. And it's because we don't get a flood of claims coming into our agency for clerical individuals for obvious reasons. You're not going to have someone who sits behind a desk. They don't have a large hazard, so their rate is pretty inexpensive. So we're very inexpensive employees because what is the risk that we have? The more hazardous you get as far as your employees, the more expensive the rate. And I tell this story to people all the time. So I'm a 51-year-old woman and I drive a sedan. My automobile insurance is pretty inexpensive. However, if I was a 17-year-old with a Ferrari, what would my automobile insurance look like? And so workers' comp is pretty much the same. It's what hazard is there? What are the claims that typically come into our agency that cost a lot of money? And so in general, workers' compensation isn't something, and I tell people, unless you are a semi-pro athletic team, which is our most expensive rate right now, generally you can afford workers' compensation. So you can pay monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. And I've yet, in the 30 years that I've been doing workers' compensation, ever had a business tell me that they could not afford to be in business because of workers' compensation. It isn't expensive. And as long as you as an employer are doing your due diligence in being safe, you generally will look at workers' compensation as just something you have to pay, and it's not something that's going to bring your business down. But it is ultimately a protection for you, because if you do not cover your employees and they file a workers' compensation claim with our agency, and we deem that they were an employee, we will cover that claim. And so what does that mean for you? So we're not saying, yes, they were an employee. Yes, they did get injured while they were working, but you did not cover them. For you as a business, you are now on the hook dollar for dollar for everything that we pay out in the lifetime of that claim. So all their medical expenses, all of their missed wages, instead of paying premiums, that is now your bill. And as I said earlier, it's very similar to automobile insurance. If you don't have automobile insurance and you wreck your car, whose bill is that? Yours. And the same thing goes for workers' compensation. If you do not cover yourself and make sure that you are protected as far as any injuries that an employee must have, those costs are now yours. And we as an agency are represented by the Attorney General. So what that means for you is any unpaid bills then go to the AG. Then these are things that we see. I see probably monthly. I get a call from someone who is either trying to get a loan, trying to open a house, buy a house, and they're saying the AG says I have this workers' comp bill. So these are things that are very important. And for most individuals, most small businesses, this isn't something that is extremely detrimental or costly to you as a business. So just make sure that you're thinking about whether you need workers' compensation coverage or not. And then before we jump into questions, the one thing that I want to tell everybody, I love my small businesses. I love you guys to death. But just because you call somebody an independent contractor doesn't necessarily mean that they are an independent contractor. I know who wants to have ownership of somebody, and if you can avoid that liability, that's what small businesses try to do, and I understand that. But when it comes to workers' compensation, if you tell the person when to come to work, you tell them when to go home, you provide the materials, the equipment, the training for workers' compensation purposes in Ohio, that is an employee.
Can
And
you
so
say
you
that one
must,
more time, please?
if you tell them when to come to work, you tell them when to go home, you provide the materials, the equipment, the training, that is an employee for workers' compensation purposes. So you do not have the ability as a business owner to determine whether somebody is or is not an employee. So I will see oftentimes people submit and send an email to me of these one-page agreements. This individual said, I'm not an employee, I'm an independent contractor, and I will not do XYZ. So I won't file workers' comp. I won't claim anything against you. I am an independent contractor. I always tell people that piece of paper isn't worth anything because the law is the law. And so I often joke with people and say, it'd be great because I would like to just get with my attorney and then draft this agreement that says Melanie can drive 90 miles an hour on 71. Not going to happen. So the law is the law. And in statute, it says that if you have control over an individual, that is your employee for workers' compensation. So these little agreements that I see all the time do not mean anything, because ultimately these discussions that we're having right now about who is an employee and who isn't, most people do not know that. Most people do not know that their private health insurance will not and cannot cover a claim that happens while you're working. And so they think they don't need it. they have a severe injury, they go to the ER or the urgent care. And so now their private health insurance, who they thought would cover it because they don't know the law and the statute, says no. Typically what happens, that very next step is an attorney gets involved and they go, well, you sound like you were an employee and you should file workers' compensation. And they do. And ultimately, if we deem that they were an employee, we do cover that claim. But because you as an employer did not pay for premiums and cover that individual, that entire $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 bill is yours. And we're all familiar with the crazy bills that we get for doctor's appointments and urgent care and emergency visits. So for you as a small business owner, it just typically isn't something that you can withstand. So it's really important to understand the law. And I'm sorry, Amber, you had a
Yeah, we had
question?
2 questions. The first question Ambrose had. So Ambrose, would you like to say what your question is?
Uh, Hello, Melanie. Yeah,
Hi,
I was just
Amber.
wondering when you made reference to like the low risk in terms of like your occupation and what Amber does, it just brought to mind carpal tunnel injuries, and I just was just wondering how have you seen those addressed? It's something that came up when I was in law school, a number of years back. They, as an intern, as a clerk, they did a training at one of the law firms downtown, and they started talking about carpal tunnel and how the injury develops over a long period of time. And this firm defends, employers. So they were saying it's going to be difficult for individuals to establish a claim because they're not going to be able to tell you when it started. So I was wondering if that's something that is now being seen in the workers' comp system.
That's a great question. And so fortunately, our agency, we've been addressing that for years and years and years. Carpal tunnel is considered an occupational disease claim. So there are only a couple of claims that are considered occupational disease, which means they happen over a period of time. But carpal tunnel is the most common occupational disease that we have within our system. So we definitely have quite a few claims within our system of people who have carpal tunnel who have said, I'm data entry, and I've been data entry for years and years and years. And so it's something that is very, very common. It gets allowed quite often.
Okay.
Now, what typically happens is within our system is trying to find out who the employer is that we should assign that claim to. Because if you're somebody who's always done data entry for 20, 30 years, who do we attribute that actual workers' compensation claim to? But ultimately, those claims do get a lot within our system. So carpal tunnel is very common as an occupational disease claim.
Okay. Okay.
Does that answer your question, Amber?
Oh, yeah, yes, it does, and it's informative, and that helps a lot. Thanks.
Good. You're welcome.
And then I had a question. So you mentioned that the BWC, and that's just the acronym because in the government world we always have acronyms, right? It's for the Bureau of Workmen's Compensation. You mentioned there's only 3 other states that have a BWC that's part of that state system. Can you speak to the benefits of that versus you not having a BWC that's part of the state system and that impact on the businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, so I've been in workers' comp for 30 years. I would say probably 20 years ago, if I was doing this presentation, people would be like at my throat because it wasn't necessarily a system that worked for small businesses or businesses in general. People had fluctuations in their premiums. So one year they may pay it $1,000. One year they may pay $3,000. And we as an agency started to, and this is before I even started with the agency because I've only been there 8 years, they started to realize we have to be more business friendly. And these fluctuations in rates and premiums isn't good for businesses. And honestly, businesses were starting to look at doing business in other contiguous states. And so that's been addressed, and it's something that I'm really proud of, and that you may not be aware, or some of you may be aware, that over the last, I think it's been 8 years, we have given back dividends to employers in the state of Ohio. So in essence, over the 8 years that any employer has been in business and had business and a policy with our agency, they basically paid nothing. Because unlike most other state agencies, and people get this confused a lot of times of, well, they're collecting taxpayer money. Our funds were not taxpayer funded. It's just employers paid premiums so that we can pay for claims. And we have an amazing investment team, which everybody in the agency always we always try to bend their ears and say, hey, how about you tell me about how you did those investments personally? But they do an amazing job. So whenever there is more money within our fund to pay for the claims, we don't have the option of giving me a better state car, which I want one. But so the money always has to go back to employers, and it has to go back in means of programs or money. And what employers have said to us is, just give me my money back. And so that's something that we have been doing over the last 8 years. And whenever we have an excess, they get money back. We forgave premiums for during COVID, the very onset of COVID. Employers typically get about 85% over the last 8 years, about 85% of their premiums that they pay to us back. And so whenever I do presentations and people say, why are we so monopolistic? Why aren't we like these other states in which it's private industry? And it's an easy answer for me is like, you think Progressive's going to give you money back because they were doing so well in their investments? Probably not. So it's most employers in the state of Ohio realize and recognize, like, this is something that if I was in a different state, this wouldn't happen. So they've basically been premium free for 8 years because of the investments that we make. Whenever we have too much money, we give it back. So the discussion about why are we monopolistic and why are we like this sort of oddball, it used to work before because there were issues before 10, 20 years ago in our system, but now that isn't the case. And like I said, Traveler is Progressive, and not trying to speak specifically about any companies, but any private insurance company, we all know because we deal with them in our day-to-day lives, yes. They don't give you money back.
Okay.
But we are mandated to do that.
Okay. And speaking on that, in a previous life, right, at a small business, and we did consulting work, and we did some work just across the river in Kentucky. And because you had to have the workers' comp, even though we were administrative, they still made sure that we had to have workers' comp. And they didn't accept our Ohio because you have to get it in the state that you're doing the work. And it was private, so we were scrambling to get that coverage, and then the rates were so much higher than Ohio. So that's another thing too. So the rates for the same amount of coverage were a lot higher. So that was a major difference in our profit margin, right? And so we had to really assess, do we still want to do this project, right? So that is something to consider, and another benefit, just speaking from a small business perspective.
And I'll just say on top of that, Amber, we have an other states coverage unit within our agency, because we get those questions quite a bit of people who say, I'm going to be working in Kentucky or Indiana or wherever, and they don't know because every state, their laws are different. We have an other states coverage unit that if you feel if you know you're going to be doing business in another state, you can contact them. If you have an Ohio policy, you can contact them and say, hey, I'm about to do business in Nebraska, Nevada, whatever. And then they will walk you through that entire process to tell you, here are the laws within that state, so that you're not just out there by yourself trying to figure that out, because every state is different. Some states say if you step 1 foot in my state for a minute, you must have workers' compensation coverage. Other states, there are more term limits of, like, if it's a week or more, then you have to have workers' compensation coverage. But there are some states that say if you do within, a second, a minute of workers' comp or working in my state, then you need to have coverage. And that's what our other states coverage unit does for any employer who's in Ohio who may need to work outside of the state.
That's yet another resource that I didn't even know about. So, like all these resources coming out in this discussion, and just wanted to point out that Melody with the D, Smith said, "Thank you for the clarity when you were talking about the Bureau of Workmen's um, compensation definition of an employee versus an independent contractor." She has a staffing company, so that's something that will help her as she's building relationships. So thank you for that. And she wanted to thank you for that clarity. So speaking of additional resources, um, would like for you to kind of talk about some of uh, your outreach activities, like such as with the like Executive Business Accelerator, things like that, that I participated with you, and also you came to one that I had participated in a few years back, but also talk about some of the inspection side that helps with farming businesses, as well as businesses, general businesses, to reduce the risk that is a free, like safety plans and things of that nature. If you can speak on that. And before you get to that, just want to remind the audience, feel free to, I like to see your faces, so feel free to turn on your cameras. Feel free to ask questions, interject at any time. Also, feel free, if you prefer to put a question or a comment in the chat, feel free. Melanie has put her contact information already in the chat, and Eric Ambrose and I, which are part of the Community and Economic Development team here at Central State University and the Extension, I have already put our contact information as well. So go ahead. Just wanted to let everybody know that. I'll turn it back over to you, Melanie.
I saw Eric had a question. Do you want to go with your question first, Eric?
Oh, thank you. Actually, that was my question. I feel like part of today you're kind of busting myths about about the agency, right? And I think something I've been learning even more recently is just how much how big a set of resources you offer. So that's where I was going to go next. I want to learn more about that.
Awesome. Well, I do want to tell Amber and Melody, I will not be offended if you ever call me Melody. My grandmother called me Melody until the day she died. So whenever somebody accidentally calls me Melody, it just reminds me of my grandmother. So call me Melody. I'm good with it. So one of the things that I think is most underutilized within our agency, and it's something I've been pushing and promoting, is we have amazing resources that are totally free. If you pay premiums within our safety services, you can get all of those types of avocation, people assisting you, giving you advice about what it would be or what it takes for you to be a safe workplace environment. So if you have a workers' compensation policy, if you pay premiums to us as an agency, every single individual employer is assigned a safety specialist, everyone. Now, what that safety specialist does for you is they're your advocate. So they will walk into your workplace They'll walk around and tell you like, OSHA will ding you for that. OSHA's going to ding you for that. This isn't good. You can't do this. This isn't safe. And then they provide you with a full report of all of their findings. The difference between OSHA and them is they're not going to fine you for that. They are not someone who is trying to go in and have a gotcha moment. So what they're trying to do for you as an employer is say, if OSHA comes knocking, and they will come knocking eventually to all businesses, here are the things that you could get dinged for. So here are the things that they will say, fine for this, fine for that, fine for this. And what they do when they present that report to you is say, do you need my assistance? What can I help you with? And then they will look out and find resources of individuals who can assist you free of charge to remedy any issue that you may currently have as a business owner that you would get fined for with OSHA. So people are always afraid of it, and I get it. People are always afraid of me as well, in which they think I'm just compliance and I can't tell her too much because she's going to go and run and tell that. I stay in my lane as far as education. My job is just letting you guys know, and I think it's the most important thing that I do, is letting all of you know what you don't know about workers' compensation. And then just being a resource and for us to say as an agency, look, just tell us what you need. If you don't know, we're here, we can assist you. Safety does that for you. Our safety division, those people are amazing. They're generally, I'd say we probably have 20 some years of safety experience in our safety division. So they know everything. They know lockout, tag out. They know about slips, trips, and falls. They're the people who you want to be in line with. Not only do you not want to avoid, or do you want to avoid OSHA coming into your facility, but you also don't want a workers' compensation claim that may drive your rates up to a level that you can afford. Because workers' compensation is very much like automobile insurance. So, as I said earlier, if I'm, 51-year-old woman and I don't have a lot of claims, then, my automobile insurance is pretty inexpensive. But if I start totaling my car on a regular basis every year, what are my premiums going to look like? So workers' comp is the same. If you do not have a lot of claims, then you have a steady workers' compensation premiums. But if every other day someone is being injured and needing to be treated, then that is going to cause an increase within your workers' compensation premiums. And so safety is so important, and they offer all of their services for free. So you can talk to them, tell them what you need, let them walk through, tell you what you don't know, because once again, as a small business owner, most of you don't know what you don't know. So you're wearing 10 different hats and trying to keep things under wrap, but workers' compensation, a court on the floor isn't something that you're necessarily thinking about, and that's what their jobs are. So please use them, contact them, contact me if you don't know who that person is, but they all take a lot of pride in trying to make sure that you're safe and your employees are safe and that you don't have an increase in your workers' compensation premiums.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, that is one of the areas that the CED team is partnering with the Ohio BWC, is that some of the inspectors who have a specialty in the farming area will be partnering with our beginning farming programming to run through that process of inspecting your farm, and for beginning farmers to, so that they know what to expect, how to prepare, and make sure that as they are planning out their operations, how to make that safer and less risky. So we look forward to those demonstrations coming up later this year. And thank you for joining us, Ms. Crystal. Eric, did you have a question or a comment? Oh, okay. I thought you were about to say something. So, speaking of which, another area in which we'll be working with Melanie is that we are always looking at creative ways to have solutions to issues. So, down in the southeast area of Ohio, there's like everywhere else, there's an issue around employment opportunities. The challenge is that there's a bigger issue, a larger issue around the reentry population. And so we are coming up with a program that will kind of make a business case on the different benefits for employers around hiring um, the those from the reentry population, and just the general population, right? Um, but also some of the additional benefits for the reentry population. And I know that later on this year in another segment, we'll be talking about some of those programs in more detail. But can you speak to some of your reentry initiatives that you all are working on that's for the general business population?
Yeah, definitely. So we currently, one of the initiatives that we have is, it has a huge long name, and I think we're trying to work on that and tweak that because it all of our state agencies, we just do very long names of programs and then extremely long like acronyms. So it's basically a program in which we are trying to encourage employers to hire individuals with substance use recovery. And within that program, what we do is if you're hiring someone who is within that spectrum, then we pay for your drug testing, we pay for the drug policy. So an employer who says, and this is happening throughout the entire state, throughout the country, honestly, of just there is a lack of people to do jobs. And these are individuals who are saying, hey, hire me. But employers obviously have been, hesitant to hire someone who may have a substance use. And when we think about reentry out of prison, I would say probably 90% of those individuals, there is some type of substance use that is involved with that. And so we're saying, give these people a chance. And what we will do is pay for all the policy, all the testing for those employers who are willing to take that chance and take that leap. So it's in its very early stages, but we're pushing forward with that initiative to try and say we're trying to meet something that employers need, which is employees that they're having a hard time with. And these individuals are wanting to be, gainfully employed. And so how can we help you sort of bridge the gap between those two?
Okay, and Eric, you had a question, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for just recognizing that, as a opportunity point, an issue. So how does, I'm just kind of curious, an employer say, well, this person we think fits in that category and go for help or apply for help from you for drug testing, et cetera. How does that employer identify that person? And
Yeah, so that's a good question. So basically, the employer, once they decide, obviously they're going to know because in general, they do background checks. Most of employers do. Once they know that, then they get the opportunity to provide those resources to that individual. So they will say, I'm hiring you, that these are things that are available to you. And then we in turn then reimburse that employer. So they don't, and this is something that's really important, Eric, that has gotten lost. And I think it's part of why we're trying to tweak our marketing is people think in order to be eligible for the reimbursement, they have to hire an individual who is in recovery. They just have to be an employer who is open to hiring individuals in recovery. So their policy just has to state that we will offer that to individuals. We will provide resources, and we won't necessarily terminate them on their first positive test. But it isn't something that they don't have to hire someone or have someone within their employment to be eligible for these rebates. So for the individual who is applying for that kind of business, who is open to that, the employer just has to say, basically, this is the program that we have. These are resources that we'll provide to you, but there is no reporting back to us as an agency that this individual is in recovery or they need assistance. It just has to be stated in their policy. And I don't know if that answers your question or not, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Ambrose, did you have a question?
No,
You had,
no,
oh,
not.
because you had that look. You know, when you start working with people for a while, he had that look. So I was just like, let
Well,
me
he
ask.
well he
What,
turned his camera on too, like he had
I
something
know,
he
but
wanted to
it
say.
was his head.
well, I'm actually watching two different that budget meeting is still going on, so I'm going back and forth. Sorry.
It's okay.
Um, no, well, could you speak to Melanie also um, uh, workers' compensation coverage for single member LLCs or single shareholder corporations? Because there are a lot of businesses that are structured that way, and the Secretary of State has been reporting like record numbers of LLCs being formed each year. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people that fall in that category, and they probably don't understand how that actually works and
And
what they
and
should do.
and also, I know that I think there's a nuance even for those small businesses where even though it's a single member kind of owner, but they can still get coverage for some of the executive members of their corporation as well.
Definitely. And it's funny because I would say probably 3-4 times a week, because I do presentations like this, that I always get people who say, what do you mean I need to get coverage? So if you do not have employees, you are not required or mandated by law to have workers' compensation coverage. However, as I said earlier, if you say hurt and work, then it must come through our agency. And so a lot of people do just go through this phase of like, I'm not mandated to have it, so I'm not going to have it. And what they don't realize is that that means they don't have coverage while they are working. So if you're a sole proprietor, you can elect to have coverage. So it's not mandated. You would not be in any fault with law or with the legislator in not having coverage if you choose not to have coverage for yourself as a sole proprietor. However, not having coverage for yourself means that you are agreeing to be on the hook for any injury that happens while you're working. So for instance, consultants who sit behind a desk, people like me, if I were a consultant and I'm sitting here behind my laptop, maybe I don't need workers' compensation coverage. But most sole proprietors that I know, if they're dealing with independent contractors and that independent contractor for some reason can't show up, then they fill in for them. So they are doing some hazardous, laborious kind of work. And they don't understand the risk is if you get hurt, that is now your claim. So that medical bill is yours, missed wages is all on you. And so those are just very important things to understand. If you're a sole proprietor, you are not mandated to have coverage. But I always tell individuals, how well can you sleep at night knowing that if I get hurt tomorrow while I'm working, am I going to be okay? And I would say for most small businesses, the answer is no, because as we talked about earlier, you know, Going to the ER once is $50,000. So can you afford a $50,000 bill? And the answer for most small businesses is no. So it's really important just to be mindful of that, be thoughtful of that. I tell people, because obviously me working for a state agency, people think that I'm going to rat them out or I'm going to report them. I tell everybody, you can tell me you're John Doe, Jane Smith, call me, tell me what you do, tell me what your estimated payroll is, which is how we define our premium. So there are 600 codes and there's a rate assigned to all 600 based on the hazard and the severity and what we get into our agency. The other aspect is your payroll or your exposure. Tell me what you do, what your payroll is, and then I can send you an estimate of what workers' comp would look like. And I think I mentioned this earlier. I've yet in my 30 years had any individual employer say, that's too expensive, I can't afford it. But I do get calls from, because my unit, anyone who complains to the governor's office, they contact us, and then we're sort of, the Olivia Popes, if you will. We're supposed to try and fix it if we can within the law. And I probably get those calls once a month of someone who is like, they didn't have coverage, so their private health insurance is denying it, and they want to know what they can do, or they want to try and apply for coverage. It's like me, my house burns down today and then I want homeowners insurance. Doesn't work that way. So I take a lot of pride in just making sure I'm telling everybody not necessarily what they want to hear, but what they need to hear. So Ambrose and Amber, I don't know if that answered. You guys have any follow-ups to that? Because I know I can go on and.
Well, I do. I mean, it answers the question. I do have follow up in terms of like when you're talking about consultants, and I would imagine you're using that because it would appear to be a low risk type of business. However, let's say that consultant has to go out and meet with this client, or go out to meet the client for lunch, or trying to get that business. And let's say if they're in a car accident on their way to or from that meeting, is that considered something that might fall under workers' comp, or would that be their personal insurance?
That's a really good question. And anybody who's been in an automobile accident recently, they ask specific questions about where were you going? What were you doing? So it's not as simple anymore as it was of just like, okay, I had an accident. They ask those specific questions, specifically in Ohio, because it is, if you're working, not ours, not my problem. Like that's you and workers' comp. And so that's a great question. If you are a consultant and you are driving to meet a client and you get into an automobile accident, that is a workers' compensation claim. And automobile insurance is really keen on that in Ohio, because they know like, well, I don't have to be on board, because if someone says they got in an accident at 2:00 on a Tuesday, what are most people doing at 2:00 on Tuesday? Working. So they start asking these questions, and if they find that you were working at 2:00 on Tuesday, they go, nope, workers' comp, not my problem, and they don't have to cover it. Now the collision, that's a whole different aspect of it. That would be covered. But as far as medical expenses, that would have to be turned into our agency and have to be covered within our agency. Your collision is totally different, but any medical lost wages, that wouldn't be something that the insurance agency would be permitted to pay for in Ohio by law.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And there's another thing I would like for you to touch on. So what I found, even for me, just a lot of us in the extension work from home. We're in our regions that we spend most of our time in, and I watch a lot of the BWC videos, right? And I find them very educational. So there was one in particular that was just simply how to make your home environment more ergonomically safe, and it was sitting in a chair, right? How to use
Mhm.
phone books and things like that. So even though I'm not a BWC member, those videos were still available to the general public. If you're a member, of course, you get education credits as you're continuing to make yourself or your business more safe. But can you speak to those videos and the benefits of just that overall program, so that people know that that is another resource?
Yeah, I think it's great, Amber, because my obviously I've been in workers' comp for 30 years.
Hmm.
So most of it was on the private side. So I represented employers for workers' compensation. And now working for the state, it's something that I think most people are afraid of. I know when I was on the private side of things, who wants to really deal with the state agency? It's just like I had to do my taxes. We all had to do our taxes a month ago. Not fun, not something. They're generally government agencies aren't people who you want to encounter or deal with unless you have to. And our agency does a really good job of trying to make sure that everybody knows here's what we have available. Here's what you don't know. Here are all the different resources, the programs, the grants. Here's who you can contact directly so you don't have to call an 800 number. And that's why I put my contact information in the chat. Is we as a state agency are trying to get away from and have done a really good job of getting away from you just call an 800 number. No, you have a person. We're here for you. And here are the different videos that you can watch. Here are we have webinars that we present in which people can watch them at any time. I did webinars a couple of months ago for small and minority businesses. We had a session of, I think there were 12 of them, and people could just log on and learn about who we are as an agency. And now it's on our website to just whenever people want to, at their leisure, look at who we are and what we're providing and understanding our agency. But the most important aspect of that webinar at the end is telling them how to find who their person is. And that's sometimes very difficult for small businesses. As I said, Amber and Ambrose, we just, people are wearing 10 different hats. So workers' comp is just like, okay, something comes up, they get something in the mail or they get an email, and then they're trying to go through that piece of paper and figure out who they're supposed to call. Everybody has an employer service specialist assigned to them, every single person who has a BWC policy. And so they can pick up the phone to that person and go, hey, whatever it is with their policy, that is your person.
Hmm.
And so we're trying to be more, we're trying to promote and present more things to the public as to who we are and be more friendly and not a government agency in
Yeah.
essence, because it's scary. I don't like dealing with the IRS. They usually always have a bill for me. And so I prefer to avoid them as much as I can. And so I understand we as a state agency, people feel the same way, but we're here to help everybody. We want you guys to succeed. We understand your small businesses. So just lean on us and specifically lean on me, because typically I can answer your question. And if I can't, I know who can. So we're here for you guys. So thanks, Amber.
Yes. And can you speak just a little bit at a high level, like with the Executive Business Accelerator and other special outreach activities that you do to help businesses as well?
And so for me, in my role as minority and small business advocate, I'm the only one in the state with our agency. So my job is to go out, figure out what you guys need. I think sometimes as state agencies, and I think this in general, we like to think we know what people want and what they need. And so we go out and we just tell them like, this is what you know, this is what you got to do. But we're not really listening to what they want. So in my role, I go out and I ask people, what do you need? What don't you have? How can I help you on the workers' compensation front? And for the most part, they say, I don't know. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. And so I've made it a point of education because whatever they take with that information that I give to them, at least I know I did my part for our agency to make sure that person at least has the knowledge to be successful moving forward in their business. So I cover the entire state and I have presentations that don't get me home until 10, 11 o'clock at night. They're up in Toledo, but I try to make connections with any organization that is helping minority and small businesses and just giving them the knowledge about our agency so that our agency isn't the reason why their great business venture, great idea goes under because they didn't know about workers' compensation and didn't pay premiums, and now they get hit with this $50,000 bill. So that's why, obviously, Amber, you and I have
Yeah,
made great connections. I
yeah,
worked with Ambrose for so many years on different topics and presentations, but it's just making sure that we're all here for you guys. And the more we talk together, the more we communicate, collaborate, the better it is for you. And obviously, anything that's free is amazing. So you get us all for free.
yes. And I like to say that's how me and Melanie made our connection and relationship, because I'll be in Columbus and I see Melanie, and then I'll be in Cleveland and I see Melanie again, and we were crossing paths so often. It got to the point where we need to do some stuff together, and then that's how we built the relationship. And Eric, you had a comment or a question?
Well, first, just to say thank you. This has been enlightening. Your clarity is just fantastic. Um, yeah, I just wonder, I'm coming out of this, I'm sold, you know, uh, just love what you're doing. But let's say I do have a small farm that I'm getting going, and I'm a sole proprietor, and I do want to opt in. Where do I get started? Or I just want to learn, where are those videos that I can go and learn about workplace safety? Or, just I wonder if you could share where people should go to start their learning.
Yeah, what I can do is I can send Amber, I can send you, Eric, and Ambrose the link for
Okay.
those videos. And then I have one-on-ones with individual small businesses. I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody who said, hey, I need to apply for coverage. And instead of going back and forth with them through email, I just send them a Teams meeting and then we talk about it for a half hour, just making sure I answer all their questions. So I'll send you guys the links for those videos. But anybody who you feel like they may have more, because you have one question and then you answer it, and then there's another question. So I always feel more comfortable just let's schedule a half hour and let's just talk it out and figure out exactly what you need. But I'll send that to you guys, Eric.
Okay, that will work, and then I'll make sure that we get that information out to our listserv and to everyone who's attended today, so they'll have that as a resource. And just want to remind everybody that Melanie's contact information, as well as Ambrose and Eric and my information, is in the chat at the beginning. And we have like a couple more minutes. I just want to reiterate before we leave some of the highlights of today's session. One, Melanie, real quick, can you give us the definition of the work, BWC's definition of an employee?
So if you control the individual, that is an employee. And the one caveat that I will say about that, because people will say, well, they have flexible schedules. I'm an employee of the state of Ohio. So, for instance, last week I had an event that made me have to work a 12-hour day. The next day, because I worked 4 hours more than I needed to that day, I just logged in 4 hours later on that day. that doesn't mean that I'm not an employee. It just means I have a flexible schedule. And so a lot of times businesses think allowing a flexible schedule means that that individual is an independent contractor. Not the case. So do you control them? Like ultimately, I'm controlled by the state of Ohio. I can say I'm going to work these hours and these hours, but it has to be 40 hours. So I don't get to say, well, maybe I'll work 20, maybe I'll work 10. So if you control that individual, that is your employee. Flexibility does not mean independent contractor necessarily. And I think that's where a lot of small businesses get confused that a person has flexibility. If an independent contractor can say yes or no to work, that's a true independent contractor. Someone who could say, nope, don't want to do it. Nope, not call me next month. Call me 6 months from now. That's an independent contractor. If they do not have the ability to say no to you, that is an employee.
And some of the benefits of being a state affiliated BWC Bureau of Workers Compensation are one that for small businesses that the Ohio BWC pays back dividends. So there's you get a return on your investment of reducing your own risk, right? Also, that if you are a small business, particularly a LLC, especially a single member LLC, you still, even though you're not mandated by law to have a workers' compensation account, you still have risk for yourself, and there's still potential risk for those who may be subbing under you, who are working on your project. So you still want to seriously consider having workers' compensation accounts. There are numerous resources available to you for free that greatly reduce your risk. If you reduce your risk, you reduce your overhead, right? So your profit margins go up as your risk and your overhead go down. So those are things to think about. And BWC is here. There's online self-directed education videos. There are things available for small farm business, general businesses. The rates, you need to contact them because it depends on the makeup of your individual staff or the type of business that your company is in. So did I capture everything? Because I want to make sure. I was learning so much and I was over here being a sponge, and I just want to make sure that I capture a lot of the main points. Are there any other main points that you want to reiterate, Melanie?
No, you did a great job. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
I
here
passed
to
it
help. All anybody has to know on this call is just use me, email me. I'm better with email than phone because I like receiving an email, because if you tell me what you need in your email, then I can research it. And then by the time I get back to you, I have all of your answers for you versus a phone conversation. Now, if it gets too detailed, that's when we schedule one-on-ones to try and get down to the bottom of what you need. But yeah, just use me, you guys.
And this will conclude our session today of CED Office Hour Live, and with the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensations, more than just the injury claim. And we had Melanie Bryant, who is the minority and small business advocate here in Ohio. She is awesome. I'm looking forward to continually working with her as always. And thank you everyone for coming and joining us. And once again, all of our contact information from the CED team, as well as Melanie's contact information, is in the chat. And if you have any other questions, follow up, please feel free to contact any of us and we will get back with you. The links, I will be emailing them out as well. And once again, just thank you, Melanie, as always. And thank you
Thank you,
everyone for
guys.
joining us. And have a wonderful Cinco de Mayo. And I'm going to get my tacos now. So enjoy and till next time.